In less than 10 years, Superman is going to enter the public domain, and then Batman will do so a year after that, followed by Wonder Woman just 2 years later. And I think this could have a massive impact on the comic industry. And I think it's a lot of fun to speculate on how this could potentially change things. And so I've got 5 predictions on what I think will happen once these characters enter into the public domain. First of all, and what is most exciting to me, is that this is going to give other companies the potential to tell stories with some of our dream matchups. I mean, think of what Marvel could do. All of a sudden, you could have Batman versus Doctor Doom. But not simply Marvel. I mean, Hasbro, when they're looking to make their next Transformers movie, might say, hey, you know what battle would be awesome? Optimus Prime versus Superman. And so I think we're set up to see some exciting stories in comics or movies or TV shows or video games and other forms of media. And I'm curious, what potential matchup are you most excited to see? Tell me in the comments below. Now, my second prediction is that this is bad news for DC because, of course, a big part of their business is based on these characters, and in less than 10 years, they're no longer going to have a monopoly on them. And of course, the market can only take so much of these characters. No matter how many Batman books are being made right now, there still is only so many Batman titles that people will buy. Well, what if all of a sudden Marvel starts making their own Batman titles, their own Superman titles? All of a sudden, this eats some of the market share from DC. Or what might be worse, what if Marvel tells stories that really nerf these characters? You know, when they first start writing Superman stories, maybe they have him fighting Thor, and you have this epic battle. And of course, who is Marvel going to have win this battle? Well, it's going to be Thor, right? The character that they have exclusive rights to. They're not going to let Superman beat Thor. Thor is going to beat Superman. Well, once you finish telling that story and you've nerfed Superman a little bit, what happens the next year when you're ready to tell another Superman story? Well, you put him against a little weaker of a character. All of a sudden, he's going against Captain America. Still, you know, a tier A type character. Not tier A in terms of power level, though. But then all of a sudden, you have Captain America outsmart Superman. Superman's looking a little worse. And then the year after, maybe you have him going against Nightcrawler and so forth. And all of a sudden, Superman doesn't look like such a bad A anymore. And this could potentially, obviously, hurt the character in the eyes of the comic fandom and then damage the DC brand. And even if that doesn't happen, I think DC isn't in trouble because they're, I think, going to spend a ton of money in legal fees to try to retain as much of a right over these characters as they can. As you might know, Disney has spent a ton of money trying to limit how much people could use the Mickey Mouse character now that he entered into the public domain earlier this year. And they've been in court years before this trying to, again, keep as much control over Mickey as they could. Well, I imagine DC is going to start doing that with Superman and Batman, and those expenses are going to add up. And of course, they're going to have to do some cost-benefit analysis and try to decide, well, which of these battles are worth fighting and which do we just give up? You know, I think DC is in potentially some big trouble. But tell me what you think in the comments below. Am I right with these predictions? Wrong with them? I don't know. Again, it's just fun to speculate and have a conversation about it. Now, one thing DC can do to protect themselves somewhat in their ownership of these characters brings me to my third prediction, which is that DC is going to start making more and more changes to their characters because there's something interesting with copyright law. So when a character enters into the public domain, you only have access to their character from the year that they were created. But when updates are made to the character, then you don't have access to those aspects of the character until you get to 95 years, I think is the time after that. So if you watch the Disney stuff, Mickey Mouse is in the public domain, but it's only the Steamboat Willie version of the character. And so when Superman enters the public domain, at first you're not going to be able to make him fly because he couldn't fly originally. Instead, he could leap tall buildings in a single bound, and so that's all Marvel can make him do in 10 years. Now, as time goes on and those stories that are 95-year-old begin to include the time he flew, then all of a sudden you can include that in your Marvel stories. But if DC keeps reinventing the characters so that they look very different 10 years from now, then what Marvel could do with the characters would look very different than that, whatever that current version of Superman or Batman are. And kind of relatedly, DC could start elevating some of their other characters, giving them more prominence than the DC Trinity. It's hard to imagine them having someone that they push more than Batman, but when they get close to losing full rights over Batman, I think they've got some tough decisions to make. And this is basically what happened to Marvel and the X-Men. When Marvel started making their own movies, they didn't have rights to the X-Men movie rights. Fox did. Of course, Marvel has those now. But in the comics, they started de-emphasizing the X-Men and started elevating the Inhumans because they had control over the Inhumans. Now, again, they've got full rights over X-Men now, so it's not a big deal. But you saw this de-emphasizing of one and emphasizing over the other based on the rights that Marvel had. And potentially, DC could start doing the same thing with their characters, where all of a sudden you don't see Superman figuring as prominently in the DC universe. And all of a sudden you have Green Lantern or Flash, or maybe even later you have Lobo. Who knows? Now, before I get to my next prediction, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, of course, I'd appreciate it if you consider doing so now. Now, my fourth prediction is that some weird things are going to be made with these characters. As you might have seen, I think it was last year, Winnie the Pooh entered in the public domain, and immediately there was this Winnie the Pooh horror movie that was released that was just awful. I haven't seen it, but it's gotten 3% on Rotten Tomatoes, so just weird, just awful. But over time, I think these stories can improve because now there's a Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2 that's coming out, and it's got 52% score on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's going to be really interesting, the type of stories that are going to be told with these characters. And it's pretty limitless of what you can do. And I think there's going to be some weird things, some strange things, some unique things, some fun things, and then some really, really good things. Which brings me to number 5, and that this could potentially lead to a resurgence in popularity in these characters, especially Superman, who I feel has lost a lot of his popularity compared to a few decades ago. Because after all, some of the most beloved characters in comics right now are really Superman. You've got Homelander from The Boys, you've got Omni-Man from Invincible. Really they're Superman, right? They're Superman stories without being able to use Superman. But what if all of a sudden Robert Kirkman could make a Superman story and he doesn't have to tell it through Omni-Man, but he can do it through Superman? Does all of a sudden that create more love for this character? I think there's a great chance that it does, that this is actually something that will be good for the character. And so even though it might not be so good for DC, for these characters, it could be something that brings new life to them. But once again, tell me what you think. Do you think I'm way off with these predictions? Do you have some of your own? I'd love to hear them. Now, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, of course, I'd appreciate it if you consider doing so now. Like, comment, thank you.